Welcome to Whispered Truth, where touching stories come alive. Let's jump into today's story.
Emily Lawson stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her fingers trembling as they traced the outline of her face. The woman looking back at her seemed unfamiliar, a stranger with tired eyes and a forced smile. At 32, she had everything she thought she wanted: a successful career as a graphic designer, a beautiful home in suburban Seattle, and a husband who, by all outward appearances, adored her. Yet, as she stood there in the harsh fluorescent light, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The sound of laughter drifted up from downstairs, reminding her of the dinner party in full swing. Emily took a deep breath, straightened her blouse, and plastered on a smile. She was good at this, playing the perfect hostess, the devoted wife. It was a role she had perfected over the years, like a character in a play she hadn't realized she'd been cast in. As she descended the stairs, the cacophony of voices grew louder. Emily's husband, David, stood in the center of their living room, regaling their guests with another of his charming anecdotes. He caught her eye as she entered, flashing her a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "There you are, darling," David said, extending his hand. Emily took it, allowing herself to be pulled to his side. His arms snaked around her waist, grip a little too tight to be comfortable. "I was just telling everyone about our plans for the summer house." Emily's smile faltered for a moment. This was the first she'd heard of any summer house. "Oh," she managed, her voice steady despite the confusion swirling in her mind. David continued, oblivious to her surprise, or perhaps deliberately ignoring it. "We're thinking of buying a place up in the San Juan Islands. It'll be perfect for weekend getaways, don't you think, Em?" She nodded, playing along. "Sounds wonderful," she said, her words hollow even to her own ears. As the evening wore on, Emily found herself retreating further into her thoughts. She moved through the motions of the party, refilling drinks, engaging in small talk, but her mind was elsewhere. When had she become so disconnected from her own life? When had David started making major decisions without even consulting her? It wasn't until the last guest had left, and the door clicked shut behind them, that Emily allowed her facade to crumble. She turned to David, who was loosening his tie with a satisfied sigh. "A summer house?" she asked, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. "When were you planning on telling me about this?" David's expression hardened, the charm he displayed all evening evaporating in an instant. "I don't see why I need to run every little thing by you, Emily. I thought you'd be happy about this." "Happy?" Emily's voice rose, weeks of pent-up frustration bubbling to the surface. "Happy that you're making huge financial decisions without even mentioning it to me. Happy that I feel like a stranger in my own life." David's eyes narrowed. "You're being dramatic. This is exactly why I don't tell you things. You always overreact." Emily felt as if she'd been slapped. She opened her mouth to respond, but David cut her off. "Look, I'm tired. We can talk about this in the morning if you've calmed down by then." With that, he turned and headed upstairs, leaving Emily standing alone in the living room. She sank onto the couch, her mind reeling. As she sat there, surrounded by the remnants of the party, half-empty glasses and discarded napkins, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was at a crossroads. Something had to change, but she wasn't sure she had the strength to make it happen. As the clock struck midnight, Emily made a decision. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. With shaking fingers, she began to type. "Things I need to remember. I am not crazy for wanting to be included in decisions that affect my life. My feelings are valid. I deserve to be heard and respected. Something needs to change." She stared at the words on the screen, feeling a mix of fear and determination. Little did Emily know, this small act of self-assertion would be the first step on a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, her marriage, and the life she had built. The next morning, Emily woke to an empty bed and the muffled sounds of David's voice drifting up from his home office. She lay there for a moment, the events of the previous night washing over her. The summer house. The argument. The late-night list she'd made on her phone. With a sigh, she pushed herself out of bed and padded downstairs, determined to have a calm, rational conversation with her husband. As she approached David's office, however, his words stopped her in her tracks. "No, Mom, everything's fine," David was saying, his voice low and irritated. "Emily's just being difficult again, you know how she gets." Emily felt her chest tighten. She leaned against the wall, out of sight but still within earshot. I know," David continued. "Sometimes I wonder if she's cut out for this family. Maybe we rushed into things." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Emily's vision blurred, and she had to grip the wall to steady herself. She'd always known that David's family was important to him, but to hear him speak about her like this, as if she were on probation in her own marriage, was devastating. Before she could hear any more, Emily retreated to the kitchen. She busied herself making coffee, her movements mechanical as her mind raced. When David finally emerged from his office, she was sitting at the kitchen island, staring blankly into her mug. "Morning, honey," David said, his tone casual as if the previous night's argument and his phone conversation had never happened. "Listen, I've got to head into the office for a bit. We'll talk about the summer house later, okay?" Emily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. David kissed her on the cheek, a perfunctory gesture, and left, the sound of his car engine fading into the distance. Alone in the house, Emily felt as if she were suffocating. She needed air, needed to escape the suddenly claustrophobic walls of the home she'd once loved. Without really thinking about it, she grabbed her keys and headed out. She found herself at Green Lake, a favorite spot she used to visit often, but had somehow neglected in recent months. As she walked along the water's edge, memories flooded back, of lazy Sunday afternoons spent here with friends, of quiet moments alone with her sketchbook. When had she last done something just for herself? Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her best friend Olivia. "Hey stranger, feel like I haven't seen you in forever, coffee soon?" A wave of guilt washed over Emily. She'd been so caught up in trying to be the perfect wife, she'd let her friendships slip away. She quickly typed a response. "Yes, please, are you free now?" 30 minutes later, Emily was sitting across from Olivia in their favorite cafe, pouring out everything that had happened. Olivia listened, her face a mix of concern and anger on Emily's behalf. Olivia said when Emily had finished, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "This isn't okay, you know that, right?" Emily nodded, tears pricking at her eyes. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm losing myself." Olivia's expression softened. "Remembering college when you used to say that your art was your way of making sense of the world, maybe it's time to pick up that sketchbook again." The suggestion hit Emily like a lightning bolt. She hadn't seriously drawn or painted in years, always finding excuses. Work was too busy, the house needed cleaning, David didn't like the mess of art supplies. But now, the idea of creating again felt like a lifeline. That afternoon, Emily dug out her old art supplies from the back of the closet. As she set up an impromptu studio in the spare room, she felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Hours passed as Emily lost herself in her art. She painted with a fervor she hadn't felt in years, pouring her confusion, anger, and fear onto the canvas. When she finally stepped back, brush still in hand, she was confronted with a stark, abstract piece, all harsh lines and turbulent colors. It wasn't beautiful, but it was honest in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in a long time. The sound of the front door opening startled her out of her reverie. David was home. Emily quickly cleaned up, hiding her painting in the closet. As she headed downstairs, she steeled herself for the conversation ahead. David was in the kitchen, rifling through the fridge. "Hey," he said, barely glancing out. "I thought we could order in tonight Chinese, okay?" Emily took a deep breath. "David, we need to talk." He closed the fridge, turning to face her with a sigh. "But the summer house look, I said I was sorry about that. Can't we just move on?" "It's not just about the house," Emily said, her voice stronger than she expected. "It's about us, about how I feel like I'm disappearing in this marriage." David's expression hardened. "Is this about what you overheard this morning?" Emily felt a jolt of surprise, quickly replaced by anger. "You knew I was there, and you still said those things." "You shouldn't have been eavesdropping," David snapped. "And honestly, Emily, can you blame me? You've been so difficult lately. My family is important to me, and you just don't seem to fit in." The words hit Emily like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the doorbell rang. David moved to answer it, leaving Emily standing in the kitchen, feeling as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. As voices drifted in from the entryway, Emily realized with growing horror that David had invited his family over, without telling her. She could hear his mother's shrill laugh, his sister's cutting remarks. In that moment, as her home was invaded by people who clearly saw her as an outsider, Emily made a decision. She wouldn't live like this anymore. Something had to change, and if David wouldn't work with her to fix things, she would have to take matters into her own hands. With a mix of fear and determination, Emily retreated to the spare room, locking the door behind her. As the sounds of David's family echoed through the house, she pulled out her phone and began to research divorce lawyers. The painting she'd done earlier caught her eye, its chaotic swirls seeming to mirror the turmoil in her heart. Emily stared at it, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was taking control of her own story. The weeks that followed were a blur of silent battles and unspoken tensions. Emily moved through her days like a ghost in her own home, watching as David's family seemed to take up more and more space in their lives. His sister, Sarah, was a constant presence, her critical eyes following Emily's every move. "Oh, Emily," Sarah would say, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you didn't dust the mantle again? I suppose some people just aren't cut out for homemaking." Emily bit her tongue, forcing a smile. "I've been busy with work," she'd reply, the lie tasting bitter in her mouth. In truth, she'd been spending every free moment researching her options, squirreling away money in a secret account, and documenting David's behavior. One evening, as Emily was preparing dinner, a task that had once brought her joy but now felt like just another performance, she overheard David and Sarah talking in hushed tones in the living room. "I'm telling you, David," Sarah was saying, "she's not good enough for this family, Mom and Dad agree. You need to start thinking about your future." Emily's hand slipped, the knife nicking her finger. She watched, oddly detached, as a drop of blood welled up, stark red against the cutting board. David's response was too low to hear, but the lack of defense spoke volumes. Emily bandaged her finger mechanically, her mind racing. She had known things were bad, but this was beyond what she had imagined. That night, after David had fallen asleep, Emily crept down to the basement. Hidden behind old paint cans and forgotten holiday decorations was a small safe. With shaking hands, she entered the combination, their wedding date, a cruel irony now, and pulled out a slim folder. Inside were the documents she'd been gathering: bank statements showing unusual transactions, emails she'd managed to access that hinted at David's infidelity, and, most damning of all, plans for a business merger that would effectively cut Emily out of her family's company, a company her parents had left to her when they passed. As she leafed through the evidence of her unraveling life, Emily felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. This wasn't the future she had imagined for herself, but she was determined to take control of her story. The next day, Emily made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. As she sat in the sleek office, pouring out her story to a sympathetic but no-nonsense attorney named Claire, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. "Based on what you've told me and the evidence you've gathered," Claire said, her eyes sharp behind designer glasses, "we have a strong case. But Emily, I have to ask, are you sure you're ready for this? Divorce can be a long, painful process." Emily took a deep breath, thinking of the empty shell her life had become, of the whispered conversations and cutting remarks, of the dreams she'd put aside in her attempts to fit into David's world. "I'm sure," she said, her voice steady. "I can't live like this anymore." As she left the lawyer's office, Emily felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. She had taken the first step towards reclaiming her life, but she knew the hardest part was yet to come. That evening, as she and David sat down to another silent dinner, Emily steeled herself for what she knew she had to do. "David," she began, her heart pounding, "we need to talk." He looked up from his phone, annoyance flashing across his face. "About what?" "About us, about this marriage." Emily took a deep breath. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and irrevocable. David's face cycled through a range of emotions: shock, anger, and finally, a cold calculation that sent a chill down Emily's spine. "A divorce," he scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, Emily. Where would you go? What would you do? You're nothing without this family." His words, meant to wound, instead strengthened Emily's resolve. She stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "I may not know exactly what I'm going to do," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word, "but I know I can't stay here. This isn't a marriage, David. It's a prison." As she turned to leave the room, David's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed, his grip painfully tight. "You signed a prenup, remember? You'll have nothing." Emily wrenched her arm free, her heart racing. "We'll see about that," she said, before hurrying upstairs and locking herself in the spare room, the one place in the house that still felt like hers. As she leaned against the door, listening to David's angry footsteps pacing below, Emily's eyes fell on her easel. The painting she'd done weeks ago, all chaos and pain, stared back at her. But now she saw something else in it too: strength, resilience, the first glimmers of a future she could shape for herself. With trembling hands, Emily reached for her phone. She had one more call to make, to Olivia, her oldest friend and the only person she felt she could truly trust. "Liv," she said when Olivia answered, her voice cracking. "I did it. I told him I want to divorce Ken. Can I stay with you for a while?" Olivia's response was immediate and full of warmth. "Of course, Em, I'm on my way. Pack a bag. We'll figure this out together." As Emily quickly gathered her essentials, she could hear David on the phone downstairs, his voice rising in anger. She knew he was probably calling his lawyer, maybe even his family. The real battle was about to begin. But as she zipped up her bag and took one last look around the room that had been her sanctuary, Emily felt a surge of determination. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was writing her own story. The sound of a car horn outside, Olivia, right on time, spurred Emily into action. With her bag in one hand and her painting tucked under her arm, she took a deep breath and opened the door, ready to face whatever came next. The spare bedroom in Olivia's cozy apartment quickly became Emily's refuge. Surrounded by the warm colors and eclectic decor that so perfectly reflected her friend's vibrant personality, Emily felt herself slowly coming back to life. It was as if she had been holding her breath for years, and only now could she finally exhale. The first few days were a blur of legal consultations, tearful phone calls with family members, and long nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering how her life had come to this. But as the initial shock began to wear off, Emily found herself rediscovering parts of herself she had thought long lost. One morning, about a week after she'd left David, Emily woke up with an inexplicable urge to paint. She set up her easel by the window, the Seattle skyline a hazy backdrop beyond the glass. As she mixed colors and let her brush dance across the canvas, Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Olivia found her there hours later, covered in paint splatters and grinning like a child. "Well, look who's back," Olivia said, leaning against the doorframe with a smile. "I haven't seen that look on your face since college." Emily stepped back from her painting, a riot of color and movement that seemed to pulse with life. "I forgot how much I love this," she said softly. "How did I let myself forget?" Olivia's expression softened. "We all lose ourselves sometimes, Em. The important thing is that you found your way back." As the days turned into weeks, Emily threw herself into rebuilding her life. She started freelancing as an illustrator, rediscovering her passion for art, and slowly building a client base. Her lawyer, Claire, kept her updated on the divorce proceedings, which were turning nasty as David fought to keep control of Emily's family company. "He's claiming that your contributions to the marriage were minimal," Claire explained during one of their meetings. "Says you were just a housewife while he built the business." Emily felt a flash of anger, quickly replaced by determination. "We both know that's not true. I have records of every project I worked on, every client meeting I attended. I might have taken a step back in recent years, but that company is as much mine as it is his." Claire nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. We'll fight this, Emily, every step of the way." As the legal battle raged on, Emily found unexpected support from her old college friends. Word had spread about her situation, and soon her phone was buzzing with messages of encouragement and offers of help. It was a stark contrast to the isolation she had felt in her marriage, and Emily realized with a pang how much she had missed these connections. One Saturday afternoon, as Emily was preparing for a small gathering of friends at Olivia's apartment, her phone rang. The screen displayed a number she didn't recognize, and she answered with caution. "Hello?" "Emily, it's Sarah." Emily froze, her sister-in-law's voice sending a chill down her spine. "What do you want, Sarah?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was uncharacteristically hesitant. I wanted to apologize for everything." Emily sank onto the couch, her mind reeling. "Why now?" Sarah sighed. "I found out what David was planning to do with your family's company. It's not right. Emily, I may not have always liked you, but what he's doing, it's cruel and illegal." Emily's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "He's been falsifying documents, moving money around. I have proof. If you want it, it's yours." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Emily gripped the phone tighter. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I realized I've been on the wrong side, and maybe I want to make things right." After the call ended, Emily sat in stunned silence. The information Sarah had promised to send could change everything. It was the key to not just winning the divorce, but to reclaiming her family's legacy. As her friends began to arrive for the gathering, Emily felt a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. There was anger at the betrayal, relief at finally having concrete evidence, and an unexpected pang of sadness for the life she had thought she was building with David. But underneath it all was a growing sense of strength. She had survived the worst of it. She had rediscovered her passion, reconnected with true friends, and found a resilience she never knew she possessed. As the evening wore on, filled with laughter and warmth, Emily found herself by the window, looking out at the city lights. Olivia approached, handing her a glass of wine. "Penny for your thoughts?" Olivia asked. Emily turned to her friend, a small smile playing on her lips. "I was just thinking, for the first time in a long time, I'm excited about the future. Whatever happens with the divorce, with the company, I know I'll be okay." Olivia clinked her glass against Emily's. "More than okay, you're going to thrive, Em. This is just the beginning." As the night deepened and the party wound down, Emily retreated to her room. She stood before her latest painting, a swirling landscape of light and shadow that seemed to hint at new horizons. With a deep breath, she picked up her brush. There was still more of the story to tell, and she was ready to paint it in bold, unapologetic strokes. The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday, innocuous in appearance but heavy with the weight of its contents. Emily's hands trembled as she opened it, spreading the documents across Olivia's kitchen table. Bank statements, emails, meeting minutes, all damning evidence of David's attempts to wrest control of Emily's family company. "Oh my God," Olivia breathed, looking over Emily's shoulder. "This is everything we need," Emily finished, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within her. She immediately called Claire, who arrived within the hour, her eyes widening as she pored over the documents. "This changes everything," Claire said, looking up at Emily. "With this, we can not only secure your divorce on favorable terms, but also potentially file criminal charges against David for fraud and embezzlement." Emily nodded, a mix of vindication and sadness washing over her. "Do it," she said quietly. "All of it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and tense negotiations. David, confronted with the evidence, began to crumble. His carefully constructed facade of the successful, charming businessman fell away, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. It all came to a head on a rainy Seattle morning in the conference room of Claire's law firm. David sat across the table from Emily, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. Emily, flanked by Claire and Olivia, felt a strange calm settle over her. "Mrs. Lawson," David's lawyer began, his tone conciliatory, "in light of recent developments, my client is prepared to offer a generous settlement." Emily looked at David, really looked at him for the first time in months. The man she had once loved, who she had built her life around, now seemed small and pathetic. She felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of pity. "I don't want his money," Emily said, her voice clear and strong. "I want my company back. I want a public apology for what he's done. And I want him to step down from the board, effective immediately." David's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this to me," he snarled, half rising from his chair. "I built that company." "No," Emily countered, standing to meet his gaze. "We built it, and then you tried to steal it. It's over, David." The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once. He slumped back in his chair, suddenly looking old and defeated. "Fine," he muttered. "You win." As they left the conference room, the divorce settlement signed and the transfer of company control underway, Olivia squeezed Emily's hand. "You did it, and it's really over." Emily nodded, feeling lighter than she had in years. "It is, but it's also just beginning." In the months that followed, Emily threw herself into rebuilding her family's company. She modernized operations, sought out new clients, and fostered a company culture built on creativity and mutual respect. To her surprise, she discovered a talent for leadership she never knew she possessed. Her artwork, once relegated to a hobby, became an integral part of her life again. She set up a small studio in her new apartment, spending weekends lost in color and form. Some of her pieces even found their way onto the walls of the company offices, a vibrant reminder of the importance of passion and self-expression. One year to the day after she had left David, Emily stood in an art gallery, surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues. It was the opening night of her first solo exhibition, a series of paintings that chronicled her journey from lost to found. As she gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their support, Emily's eyes fell on a familiar face in the crowd. Sarah stood near the back, looking uncertain but offering a small tentative smile. Emily nodded in acknowledgement, a gesture of peace if not forgiveness. Later, as the crowd thinned and the evening wound down, Emily found herself alone in front of her centerpiece, a large canvas alive with color and movement. At its heart was a figure, arms outstretched, emerging from a tangle of dark, constraining lines into a burst of light. "It's beautiful," Olivia said, appearing at her side. "What do you call it?" Emily smiled, taking in the painting that represented so much of her journey. "I call it The Awakening," she said softly. As they stood there, contemplating the artwork and all it represented, Emily felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The path hadn't been easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead. But she had found her voice, reclaimed her power, and rediscovered the joy of creating her own story. The gallery lights dimmed, signaling the end of the evening. As Emily gathered her things, preparing to leave, she paused for one last look at her exhibition. Each painting was a chapter in her story, a testament to her resilience and growth. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, lost, afraid, and trapped in a life that no longer fit. And she thought about the woman she was now, strong, independent, and excited for the future. With a small, satisfied smile, Emily turned off the lights and stepped out into the cool Seattle night. The city stretched out before her, alive with possibility. She took a deep breath, feeling the promise of tomorrow in the air. Her story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now, finally, she was the one holding the pen.
Hey, want to listen to another best story? Then click the floating video and subscribe for more.